I hope everybody's warm enough. Pam is finally warm enough, and I'm trying to turn it off of simmer to... Before I begin, I'd like to ask, maybe Clara and Willow could help me. Oh, Clara just left. Oh, she's there. Would you guys come give me a hand? Just pass these out on this side, Willow, too. Everybody should have a copy. These are things that you need to fill out for Sunday. So this requires, it's kind of homework, but it's mostly stuff you can think about. Really not wrong answers. But I realize what often happens is we tell you what to think, and the typical mind, it doesn't work that way. There should be plenty. Everybody get one? Thank you. Did you get one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. When it comes to teaching, I'm fairly simple-minded. There's a locus, there's a body of information that I want people to know. And if I have to spoon feed it, pound it in, whatever, if they know that, then I figure they can go from there. They always tell people that you're not supposed to tell them what to think, but how to think. But since most people don't want to be bothered with how to think, then we have to kind of start them off. I'm just going to address a few things tonight I think are important. This year for Passover, and this is the emphasis of Passover anyway, we want to focus on the fact that in the Lord, He makes things new. He starts things over. And I think we're all very aware of this. If you ask somebody how old they are, most likely they will tell you in years. I've never had someone tell me in seconds. Most of us probably don't know. But the thing is that why would we tell people things are in years or weeks? Because there are cycles. And Sunday is the first of the week. Sabbath is the last day of the week. The days are in the middle. And there's a cyclicity to life, and there's also rebirth and growth and new, things that are new. And in fact, the way God's made us, if we don't have something to look forward to, if we don't have something new in our lives, we will very often descend into hopelessness, lethargy, boredom, you name it. We need something new. To remind you, Exodus 12, speaking of this month of Nisan, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year for you. So this every year at spring, this was the beginning of the year. And you probably also know in Exodus 40, when they built the tabernacle, in the first month of the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was erected. And so, and we can find other things. Another favorite verse. The Lord's acts of mercy do not end, for His compassions do not fail. They are new every morning. Isaiah 43, do not call to mind the former things or consider the things of the past. Behold, I'm going to do something new. Now it will spring up. Will you not be aware of it? I will even make a roadway in the wilderness, rivers in the desert. And of course, that is new. rivers in the desert. We live in the desert. We know how new that is. And then 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in the Messiah, if anyone is in Christ, this person is a new creation. The old things passed away, behold, new things have come. And we'll just share a couple of things about that. I've sensed in my spirit for some time that we in the house of Aaron are in a place where we need a sense of new. We need a sense of recharge, of renewal, of revival. And the Bible is always, I like to say the truth is held in tension, because we also have scriptures that stand in the ancient paths, stand in the way of the ancient paths. And, you know, there's an element that we need to cling to what's been given to us in history. But there's also this thing in our spirits that needs to be new. In fact, this is one of the definitions of life, is that we go through constant cycles of renewal. In Genesis 1, in the creation story, right off the bat, on the second day, it says that God put an expanse between the waters. I'm not even sure exactly what that means. But then it says in the third day that he divided the waters and dry land appeared. Where do we hear that same imagery? When the children of Israel left Egypt and they came to the Red Sea, what happened to the water? It was divided, and the people went over on dry land. When they went into the land with Joshua, what happened again? The waters divided again. Dry ground appeared, and the people entered in. I'm just emphasizing this time of year is a celebration of the new. In the world right now, there's a revival going forth. And some people will say, well, why do we need revival? The reason we need revival is because of the fall. Because of the fall, everything is in decay. This is an easy question. What's the death rate been so far? 100%. Anybody here going to beat those odds? We're working on it. But I mean, everything is in decay. And with the fall, when Adam and Eve sinned, an element was introduced into the world that wasn't there before. And that element was that everything was falling apart. And one of the things in life that's crucial for people is to be able to find redemption, restoration, because if all they can see is the decay, it breeds hopelessness, it breeds pointlessness, futility. And people won't, why should they keep going? And another thing, cycles. When you've lived in the community as long as I have, and I realize I'm a prime target here, most of you know what I'm going to say before I say it. I've said it so many times. And we know little figures of speech that the different ones of us have. Some people say, in other words. Some people say, and that stuff. There are a whole bunch of things that we do. And we just do it and do it and do it. I remember Wally would get up to bear his testimony, and there was a certain part of that was completely scripted. And at times you'd find yourself thinking, can't he say something different? But now that he's not here to say it, I miss it. And I realize that sometimes in the repetition, there is life, if you look for it. But Yogi Berra had a famous statement. He said it's deja vu all over again. And there are these cycles that go on in our lives, and some of them are probably not too dangerous or injurious, but others are very bad. We have cycles in our families. We have cycles in our communities. And Passover is about breaking cycles. Because as good as some cycles are, like I told you, the year, the month, the day, those are good things. They help us measure our lives. But there are some cycles that we look at it and we say it will never change. I mean, those who first, and this is an ongoing problem, trying to address the problem of homelessness, poverty, we tried just pushing money into the inner cities. And what we found, if we didn't do something besides just put money in there, is we produced a system that went through this cycle. Fatherless children grow up and have fatherless children that don't get a job, that have fatherless children that don't get a job. And the people living in it definitely felt just as in bondage as the children of Israel did in Egypt. And we can do this in our own lives. If I have a problem that everyone's got to do things the way I demand, and if they don't, then I'm uptight, I'm anxious, I'm angry. That cycle is going to capture me, and I'm not going to be able to get out of it without a Redeemer. Rarely do we break the cycles willingly. And one of the cycles that's very important is the need for significance. And one of the things I've noticed, I'm 72 years old, this hasn't gone away. I was just embarrassed thinking about something. We were doing some recordings. I think it was with, was his name Justin? It was here? McClendon. And a lot of the songs we were recording were songs I had played before, but they didn't ask me to play. And I remember thinking, what's this about? And feeling bad about it. You know what? There's a reason they didn't ask me to play, because there are people that are better. And the other thing is the need to be significant by being above or in front of others is the whole problem of the story of the Bible. To search for my significance by trying to find a way to get ahead of you, above you, or to put you down creates most of the angst and the hurt in the world today. Because we can't be comfortable with who we are and just accept who we are. Because do you realize that if you are content with who you are, you're going to be content with who other people are. But if life is this struggle, and you can see right off the bat, Adam and Eve, what did Satan say to them? If you eat this fruit, you'll be what? You'll be like God. You'll be a step above where you are now. Fell for it. Cain and Abel, they brought their offering. God accepted Abel's, he didn't accept Cain's. The only thing Cain could see to retrieve his significance, he lost his sense of the firstborn. So he kills Abel. It's pretty strange because his problem was with God, but this is, you'll see a lot of times that in our dysfunction, we hurt the people that didn't hurt us. We just hurt them because we're hurting. Ham made fun of Noah when he was drunk. Why do we scorn or make fun of people? Why do we poke fun or laugh at them? What are we getting out of it? It's to elevate ourselves. The next thing that happens, this is the story of the brokenness in the Bible, is the Tower of Babel. Can anybody here tell me why they built the Tower of Babel? To do what? They were going to do something for themselves. They were going to make a name for themselves. You were all right what you said, but they were going to make a name for themselves. Why? Because they had not taken on the name of God. And it's very plain. It says they took bricks for stone and pitch for mortar. In other words, they didn't want to take the things God had made. They were going to make it themselves, and they were going to make a name for themselves. And that describes the whole problem of the world. We're done. You know what the problem is. Because if I don't feel good about myself, if I don't feel significant, if I don't feel like anyone cares, I'm going to be very dysfunctional. and I'm not going to be easy to live with. So God chooses Abram, and he chooses Abram to redeem the world. He says, Abram, through you, I will raise up a seed, and through him, the whole world will be blessed. And he says, your descendants, those who bless them will be blessed, those who curse them will be cursed. And right off the bat, Abram doesn't seem to have this problem, but everyone around him does. He and Lot have to separate. Who gives the other one the choice? Abram, who had the right to make the choice. Abram. He didn't because he trusts God. Lot picked the fertile place. How'd that work out? Then Abram and Sarah go through this whole scenario. And I'll try to move through it quickly, but God says, I'm going to bless you through your seed. They wait and they wait and they wait. He gets the promise when he's 75. By 86, nothing's happened. And Sarah says, it's time that we make something happen. Here's my servant Hagar. Go into her and raise up a child. Raise up an heir. So Abram does that. How does Sarah like the result of this? It threatened her name. The minute Hagar had a child, Sarah was less in Sarah's eyes. Not in Abram's eyes, not in God's eyes, but in Sarah's eyes. She was less. So she mistreated her and she fled. The Lord told her to come back, and so she came back, had the baby. He was close to 14 when God finally blessed Sarah, and she had a son. And what's the first thing we find Ishmael doing to Isaac? He's mocking him. And of course, this is a pun in Hebrew because yitzhak and mocking are the same word. Yitzhak, laughter, this is Isaac. Have you noticed you can laugh with people or at them? When we laugh with people, that's healthy. When we laugh at them, it's this, make a name for yourself again. So this goes on. Isaac prays for Rebekah to have a child because she's barren, like Sarah. 20 years after they get married, she has twins. And the Lord tells her that she's got turmoil, struggles in her womb. She says, what's going on? And the Lord said, well, you've got two nations, and the older one will serve the younger. The interesting thing is that she hears this word from the Lord, and she has to help God. My need to help God is directly related to my need to make a name for myself. If I believe God is making a name for me, I do not have to make a name for myself. By the way, most of us feel like we have to make a name for ourselves. We're wired that way. You know how Jacob and Esau struggled, and Rebekah joins into the battle, and first Jacob gets Esau to sell him the birthright for a bowl of soup, and then when Isaac tells Esau to go out into the field, kill the game, and fix it the way that Isaac loves and bring it to him, and Isaac will give Esau his blessing, the blessing of the firstborn. Rebekah hears this, and what does she do? She kills a kid, skins it, takes the skins and put them on Jacob's arms, so he'll be hairy like Esau, which says great things about Esau. Puts on Esau's garments so that he'll smell, and the clothes will be Esau's. And then she fixes the kid the way she knows Isaac likes the game fixed. Jacob goes right in there, and Isaac says, boy, that was quick. But he gives him the blessing. What's the first thing out of Jacob's mouth when he walks into his father's bed where he's going to ask for the blessing? Isaac says, who are you? And he says, I am Esau, your firstborn. He barely walks out of the room, and Esau walks in. And Isaac says, who are you? I am Esau, your firstborn. This so angers Esau that he's going to kill Jacob as soon as Isaac dies. So Jacob has to leave, and Rebekah goes to Isaac and she says, let's send Jacob to Haran to find a wife because I'm so tired of these Canaanite wives of Esau, these idol worshippers. Which isn't really the reason she was sending him away. It was to save his life, but it was also a good reason too. When Isaac blesses Jacob to leave, he actually gives Jacob his true blessing, which is you will inherit the blessing of your father Abraham and you will be given the land. All the other stuff was Esau's. Most people don't see that. When Jacob comes back to the land, you know what he does? He bows down to Esau and calls Esau his Lord. It's okay if Esau was the firstborn in the sense of power. Jacob received the inheritance the way God always said he would. But this sets them up. Jacob goes down to Laban. Another pattern here. I don't want to make this too long. But there are patterns in the Bible, and there are patterns in my family. There are patterns in your family. Some of them are good and some are bad. The pattern in the scripture is the patriarchs would experience a famine and they would leave their inheritance and do something stupid. There came a famine. Abraham went, he was Abram at the time. He went to Egypt, and what did he do with Sarah? He said, this is my sister. Why? Maybe not to make a name for himself, but to save his name. Isaac did the exactly same thing. A famine came, he went in. And now we have Jacob going, and in a very real sense, Jacob going to Laban is bondage. He works for 20 years without wages. When you marry, who gets the dowry? It comes to the husband, right? The dowry comes from the wife's side of the family, am I not right? Jacob did not get a dowry. Jacob paid for both wives. 7 years apiece, and then he stayed 6 more years. The birth of Joseph triggered Jacob to go back. The birth of Joseph, he went to Laban and he said, send me back to my father. He uses the exact Hebrew word that Moses takes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go. Shalach. Send me out of here. So Jacob goes to the land, goes back to his inheritance, and his sons are raised with the seed that was sown clear back with Adam and Eve and Cain, and it just kept growing through the generations till we get to the place of Jacob, who has 4 wives and 12 sons, and the dysfunction is so great because of what we call the law of increase. When you go out to the field and you plant a seed of barley, it doesn't raise one seed. If it's good barley, one seed could produce what? 20, 30 seeds? And then those 30 seeds will, how many? What happens in 10 generations? We have this tremendous dysfunction, this fighting to make a name for themselves, and Joseph comes along. He is the 11th son, and Jacob immediately treats him as the firstborn. Gives him the coat of many colors, gives him special favor. Joseph tattles to his dad about his brothers, and then Joseph starts having dreams that are the easy kind to interpret. We were out in the field harvesting, and your 11 sheaves bowed down to my sheaf. Simple. I saw vision of 11 stars and the sun and the moon, and they all bowed down to me. These are legitimate dreams, but probably better not to have told them. This inspired such hatred that the brothers led by Judah were going to kill Joseph. The same thing that was going to happen to Jacob was going to happen to Joseph. Judah at the last minute says, he's our own flesh and blood. Let's sell him. Let's not kill him. Here's the amazing thing that I had not seen before. They killed a goat. They poured the blood, dipped Joseph's coat in the blood, and went to Jacob and did to Jacob what Jacob had done to Isaac. These patterns are dangerous. They went to they brought this, they said, you tell us, is this your son's coat? Of course they knew it was. But what did Jacob think that blood was? They were both deception. The goat was pretending to be something it wasn't. I hope you see that these patterns are so developed, but by the time God saves the family through Joseph in Egypt, he goes through the period of slavery. Periods of slavery characterize the history of God's people. It happens over and over. Why did they go to Egypt when Joseph was there? Because of a famine. Just go back and read Genesis and see how many times people left their inheritance because of a famine. And then finally, they cry out to God, and it says God remembered his covenant. And he sends Moses to deliver the people. But the mode of deliverance for the people is the last plague, which is a plague that will either save or kill what person? The firstborn. We've had this battle all through the history now, making a name for yourself, seeking for significance, trying to be number one. And God comes to Moses and he says, you tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Israel's my firstborn son. If you do not let my son go, I will kill your firstborn. One of the things we see in this story, and it's easy for me, when they analyze brains, I'm this really left-brained person. And I can love just studying patterns and concepts and words, but this is about life. This is about what really impacts us. And they went through all those plagues to separate Israel from Egypt. And one of the reasons that they have to go through the Passover sacrifice is because until Egypt wants Israel to go, Israel will not leave. The cycles that we see cannot be broken in Egypt. Pharaoh is the picture of perpetuating this cycle. Because Pharaoh was great. When Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, God says to do such and such, what's his response? Who's God? I'm Pharaoh. Who's God? In some ways, I see the death of the firstborn, the death of the lamb, is the death of the ambition, the sorrow, the feelings of inferiority that plague us. Because now God has said, all of Israel is my firstborn. And when they place the blood on the doors of their house, they take the name of the Lord on themselves. And when you take the name of the Lord on you, you no longer have to make a name for yourself. Because you know who you belong to. You all know the story. On the 10th day, you choose a lamb. On the 14th day, the lamb is sacrificed. What's kind of interesting here is, again, the blood is collected. And remember in the first Passover, they were told, what animal were they to use for the sacrifice? A lamb, or could be a goat. Why could it be a goat? I can tell you why. Go back and read the story of Jacob and read the story of Joseph. That's why a goat was included. Because the lamb that died was dying for somebody. The lamb that died in each person's house died instead of the firstborn of that house. Our significance, our need to succeed at the expense of others dies in the Passover. And by putting the blood on the door of our house, and I mentioned this the other day, I think it's very significant, that they were told to take the blood and put it on the doorpost and the lintel, but it also says out of a basin. The Hebrew word for basin is soph, which is also the word for threshold. So when you looked at the house of the Israelites, you would see blood on the top of the door, blood on the sides of the door, blood on the bottom of the door. The entire door surrounded by blood. In the morning, after they'd eaten the Passover sacrifice that night, for one family, if the family was too small, they shared it with a couple families. But they got ready to go, and they left in the morning. They walked through that door surrounded by blood, and they were born again. It's a picture of a womb. Because on that day, Israel was born as a nation. It's back to this cycle of new. Because how helpful and how hopeful were the Israelites through all this? They pretty much lost it. I mean, 400 years of slavery will do that. One of the things that we will see is the lamb was a substitute for the firstborn for the Israelites. And the lamb that laid down its life and its blood protected them. It's very much like the crucifixion, because when Yeshua died on the cross, he did not die for himself. He did not need to die. He had done nothing. He did not deserve to die. His death didn't serve him. He died for each of us. He died for Israel, for his people, his firstborn. And it gives us a start. It allows us to start over. It's a time, that's why it's in the first month. One of the interesting passages in Colossians said that he nailed the document that was against us to the tree. And I think everyone, I was a kid. I'm sure you've heard this too. I was told that at the judgment I was going to sit in a room with God and they were going to play a tape of my whole life. And I remember thinking, I hope I can just die or just... Anybody here have horror thinking about seeing yourself? But guess what? The cross nails my sins, my failures to the tree. It says he forgot them. Why would I remember them? And I think one of the things that is important here, which becomes important for all of us, is that this is how God broke the cycle of slavery with Israel. If I'm finding something in my life, and one of the things I've noticed, you're a wonderful bunch of people. You really are. I sense some tiredness. I sense some futility, some hopelessness. That's natural. But when that happens, in some sense, I need to be born again. I need to start over. I need to remember that his mercies are new every morning. You know, if you really feel crummy and someone comes up and tells you you should feel good, that always helps, right? Maybe you've never done that. I'm afraid I have. It's kind of stupid. But because how I should feel is not how I do feel. And yet, the reality is what God has done for us is extremely powerful. It tells us in Hebrews, in plain words, other places intimate it, and that is that Yeshua, Jesus, will come twice. It says, just as it is destined for people to die once, and after this comes judgment, so the Messiah also, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time for salvation without reference to sin, to those who eagerly await him. I think you're all aware that it says in the law, in the Torah, that cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. And one of the things I've noticed in cycles is they can become curses. You'll actually see families, and I'm a little careful to say this, but it looked to me like this, that when you looked at the Kennedys, that their young men just seemed to all die right in the prime of their lives. And please understand me, I'm not judging them, because we can fall into curses through our generational thing. Remember what it says in Exodus 20? That the Lord visits the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. But then he does promise through those who love him, his love will go for thousands. But what I guess I'm saying, let's look at the cycles that are keeping us from the love of God. Let's look at the cycles that are keeping us like we're living in Egypt. Like we're fighting for significance. Like we don't, one of the things I can use to measure my walk with the Lord is when you have a great achievement and it just fills me with happiness. Then I know I'm doing well. If every time you do well, I feel threatened, I'm not doing well. That's Pharaoh. That's being in bondage. And Paul says in Romans 8 that the whole creation is longing to be set free. Like I mentioned, if you want to emphasize it, we see this constant decay around us, deterioration. People get older. I feel pretty good for 72, but I'm not 50. I remember thinking 50 was old. That was really young. I'll bet a bunch of you can agree with me. That's just barely getting started. And then there are others that look at me at 72 and think, you're just a whippersnapper. You're just getting started. And there's this inexorable slide. And when we look at society, see, I think one of the things I've noticed too, if people are looking at the world today and they're looking at governments and the struggles that people have, and how much of what's going on in the country today is the need to make a name for themselves. The battles haven't changed. And you look at those poor Israelites in bondage, and we're still there. One of the things that really grabbed me was when I started thinking about history. The Israelites were enslaved by Egypt. They escaped. God took them out, brought them into their own land. How long was it before they went into sin and the Midianites and the Philistines, countries surrounding them, pillaged them? Ammonites, they were just constantly beat up till God would raise up a judge, deliver them, and then they go back into that cycle. Finally, they asked for a king. They got a king, Saul, and everything that Samuel told them a king would do, taxes, take your young men, young women to serve the king, that all happened. And before long, they found, one of the things I had never thought of before, when Solomon built the temple, the very place where God was to dwell, do you realize how much of that labor was slave labor? How pleasing is that to God? And then the kingdom splits. This northern kingdom is taken away by Assyria, the southern kingdom by Babylon. Some of the southern kingdom comes back. The vast majority stayed in Babylon, which people will forget, in exile. Before Yeshua, at the time of the Maccabees, they had a brief moment of independence. That didn't last long because they couldn't fight their enemies, and so they made an alliance with Rome. When you're this big and you make an alliance with somebody this big, guess what's going to happen to you? And they're back in bondage again. The early believers, the people Yeshua came to, were in bondage by the religious leaders of the time. They had turned the Torah into a burden. And Yeshua tells them, he says, if you abide in my word, if you practice what I've told you, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free. Passover is a time of freedom. But here's the thing that really wakes me up to the cycles. They became free. They served the Lord, but it was a matter of 200 or 300 years, and the oppressed turned around and oppressed the Jews. For 2,000 years, the church has enslaved and impoverished those who took the name of Abraham publicly. It's awful. They wouldn't let them own land, wouldn't let them be farmers, all kinds of jobs they couldn't do. They killed them. There were pogroms. It's just horrible till it came together in the Holocaust. And certainly not all Christians were this way, but the institutional church did not respond to the Holocaust. Individuals did, Corrie ten Boom and a few. And I just say this, the cycle, God sets us free and we use our freedom to enslave others. What's the history of how we handled blacks in this country? Native Americans. These cycles keep going on. And unless you go through Passover, if you have been enslaved, you will turn around and enslave someone else. Because that's how Pharaoh works. You do it to me, I'll do it to you. I saw an interesting story, and I'm going to try to wrap this up. Because all of this to say, God's called you and me to experience the Passover today, and just as Yeshua, Jesus, redeemed us and brought redemptive changes to our life, He's asking you and me to do that. So a fellow named Darrell Davis, he's a black blues musician. He has spent 30 years befriending members of the Ku Klux Klan. How many of you know this is a bit unusual? Yeah. This started because he played the piano really well, and he played for this club, and this fellow came up and he says, "You play like Jerry Lee Lewis. How did you learn to play like that?" And the guy looks at him like, "You did realize Jerry Lee Lewis picked this up from the black musicians, not the other way around." The guy didn't. Anyway, they started talking, going back and forth, and the fellow said, "You're the first black man I've ever talked to." And he was a little taken aback. He was very friendly. They kept talking. Somehow it came out in the story, in their conversation, that this guy was a card-carrying Ku Klux Klan member. And it kind of opened Darrell's eyes. He said, "You know what? I've been fighting these people. I've been hating these people. Let's do something different." So he started making friends with Klan members. He's had 200 Klansmen turn their robes over to him. That's redemption. One time he was having a conversation with this white man. I love how people do things like this. The white man said, "All black people have a gene for violence." Darrell said he had never been violent with anyone. The white man said, "It's latent. It will show up later." Now I've got to find my own notes. And so Darrell's going, "How do you argue with somebody who's that far out?" I was dumbfounded. I'm just driving along. He's sitting over here all smug and secure like, "See, you have no response." And I thought about it for a minute. Then I used his point of reference. I said, "Well, we all know that all white people have a gene within them that makes them a serial killer." He says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, name me 3 black serial killers." He thought about it, and he thought about it, and he couldn't come up with any. And so this guy, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy, all whites. I said, "Son, you are a serial killer." He says, "Darrell, I've never killed anybody." I said, "Your gene is latent. It hasn't come out yet." He goes, "Well, that's stupid." I said, "Well, duh." But you know what? You're right. What I said was stupid, but no more stupid than what you said. He got very, very quiet, and he changed the subject. 5 months later, based on that conversation, he left the clan. His robe was the first robe I ever got. And initiated this man. He doesn't call it a ministry, but he just loves Ku Klux Klan people. He makes friends with them. He listens to them. And this man is not in Pharaoh's kingdom. He's free from that. Had another great story. A minister that I knew, he was Messianic. And somewhere I have the notes for it, but who knows where they are. He was working hard in the ministry, he and his wife and another couple. And someone told him, he said, I don't like what's going on between your wife and this other fellow. And he said, this guy's my best friend. We two couples have been friends forever. There's just nothing. Turned out he was wrong. About 6 months later, the whole thing blew up. Both couples divorced. And I mean, it destroyed his ministry. It destroyed his life. He almost became suicidal. I mean, he never quite lost his love of the Lord and his connection. But then he believed Yeshua, Jesus, was faithful. And he stayed with him, and God healed him. And God reconciled him and changed his life. He got remarried, he got back into ministry. This all took years. So one time he's at an airport, and he looks over, and he sees this guy who's not seen for 10, 15 years. He says, I'm going to go over and talk to him. And the other fellow was talking to another fellow there, and he says, this guy walking over, if he comes up and punches me in the nose, I deserve it. That's how terrible he felt about himself. But the minister walked up and says, good to see you, shook his hand, and the guy kind of carefully, how are we doing? And he says, I've forgiven you. I've laid that down. That's gone. And the change in this man who'd been carrying this. And the guy that this happened to was telling me the story. And he said, it showed me that just as there are ripples of condemnation and judgment, there are ripples of redemption. Because he said, from the ability that God gave me to let go, to forgive, to move on, redemption moved on, from redemption moved on. That's what the Passover story is about. You can start over, no matter how awful it is, how black it is. It can be moved on. And as I usually do, I go wandering around and lose my points. And we bring this one thing I want to say. The Lord has really blessed us. He really has blessed us. I might have to pray about it. Kaya's been having a few of us get together on Sabbath evening. God wants to do something new. He's that kind of a God. He's a renewing, reviving, restoring God. He's the kind that sees dry bones rotting in the valley, and he says, Ezekiel, speak to them. And the bones come together, and the sinews connect them, and the muscle comes and covers the bones, and then he breathes, and they stand to their feet in mighty army. That's the kind of God he is. One of the things the Lord brought to me, I have a tendency to be very content. In fact, we're told in the Bible, Paul says, I've learned to be content wherever I am, whatever I'm doing. That's a good thing, but I want to tell you something. You need to have holy dissatisfaction. Until Israel cried out to God and said, we can't stand it in slavery, they would have stayed in slavery. So if everything is perfect in your life right now, celebrate that. That's great. But if there's some things that you think God would like to change in your life, or use you as an instrument to change what's around you, fan that holy dissatisfaction. Because God uses it. God uses the man or the woman that says, I refuse to live in bondage anymore. I am not going to be talked to by my loud mouth, whatever it might be. Whatever it is that you are doing, that I am doing, that's stopping God from doing this new thing. There's something about Egypt that looks very attractive when we're leaving it. Just like I had some friends when I was in college. Every weekend, I swear, and it probably wasn't, but it seemed like it. Every weekend, they couldn't wait for Friday so they could get drunk on Saturday, throw up all Sunday, and come to school on Monday with a hangover. And on Monday, they were never going to drink again. It was not a pleasant experience. By Tuesday, it wasn't so bad, and by Friday, they were raring to go again. And if you've never been around people like that, that's you and me kind of people. That's, you know, when we're in the slough of despair, it's actually slough of despair, but I've never said it that way. But if you're there, when you're in it, it's not a good place. But you get away from it, and it's so familiar, and everything is, you know. I love the fact that God set the children of Israel free, and they're not gone very long, and they start talking about onions. And, you know, that's a serious character deficiency. That is a joke, please. As we close here tonight, as we go through the weekend, we have things planned. I really enjoyed the center that Carrie led on Wednesday, walking through what God did for Israel. Now we're moving through the feast. Tomorrow night we're going to be sharing with an inter-valley celebration of the resurrection. Tomorrow, Kaya's going to have us go through the daily sacrifice. We'll do the communion. We've got a lot of beautiful things we do to celebrate what the Lord has done in our lives. Don't be hesitant to ask God for what He's got for you that's new in this season. His mercies are new every morning. This is the first month. And I love the fact that even at 72, it's still the first month. We can still start over. There's a wonderful scripture, and we'll close with this one. And it's actually in a couple places. But it says, He who scattered Israel will gather them. And you know, sometimes it seems like the Lord has allowed our lives to just fly apart, shatter in a million pieces. But His promise is there. I will do a new thing. I'll rebuild what's broken. And I'll make it like it was never broken in the first place. In fact, it will be better. It's a good time, the Passover season. I hope you've had a chance to look at the paper I handed out. And maybe I'll just touch on this briefly before we say the closing prayer. It says here that in Romans 1, since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, God's, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. I think it's important for you and me to look at creation and look for the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the resurrection. A whole bunch of other spiritual truths. And this is, I gave you some examples. I think you're all well aware that we see all through life that many times to maintain life, something gives its life. In fact, I think we're all aware we can't eat unless something gives its life. Whether it's plant life or animal, everything that gives us energy and protein was alive. So you can figure that one out. The unleavened bread is more difficult for me. I'm hoping you can figure this out. I'm waiting for your answers on Sunday. The unleavened bread, the Bible tells us, is somehow related to the burial of Yeshua. There's something about we put away everything that's in the world. You know, Greg has mentioned off Hebrews 12 that says, let's throw everything off that hinders or holds us back. And unleavened bread speaks to that. Where will you see that in nature? And then finally, where do we see the message of the resurrection? I think actually that's probably the easy one, because we see it everywhere. Every time you see, I was looking today, Chandra was showing us over at the table, Ben and Christian playing with little Lila Rose, and her just beaming and laughing. She's kind of a screamer. And but looking at her, you go, you know what? I know 4 and 5 generations from 4 spokes on the wheel coming to this little girl. And there's life. Something new. We can see the resurrection. And then finally, we start counting the Omer. Oops, I told you the answer. We start counting that tomorrow night when the sun goes down. Sunday is the first day. And, you know, sometimes we don't make a big deal of this. The Jews have a tendency to make a big deal of it. I would at least like you to do something. Put a calendar on your wall. Do something so that every day you're noting what day it is. 1, 2, 3. Because when we come to 50, that's a time of great fulfillment. That's a time of expectation. So thank you. Let's all stand. Dean, would you close for us, please?
Father, we give you thanks and praise for who you are, your faithfulness, and your faithfulness in this time that we remember what you've done for your people, that we might serve you, that we might always look forward to what you want for your people, bring them back to you. So we give you thanks and praise. May we keep you on our minds. May we fellowship with all those praising your name. We give you thanks and praise in Yeshua's name.
Amen. I believe 10 o'clock is brunch. Noon we'll come together for the daily sacrifice. I do need some people to volunteer to help bring the furniture over here tomorrow morning, say about 8 o'clock. So